Are we witnessing the beginning of the end for two once untouchable defensemen? Or is this just another wild speculation that'll fade into the hockey rumor mill? The hockey world is buzzing with a proposition so audacious, so potentially franchise-altering, that it's forcing fans in two of Canada's most passionate markets to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes your highest-paid players become your biggest problems. The latest trade scenario making waves involves Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman Morgan Rielly and Edmonton Oilers blue liner Darnell Nurse. A one-for-one swap that's equal parts intriguing and terrifying for both franchises. When veteran hockey analyst Doug MacLean declares he'd make a trade in a heartbeat, you know something's fundamentally broken. His assessment of Morgan really wasn't just critical, it was damning. I don't know if he's a top four guy right now. MacLean stated bluntly on the Kuiper and Bourne show, words that should send shockwaves through the Maple Leafs organization and their fanbase alike. Think about that for a moment. A player carrying a $7.5 million cap hit, once considered the cornerstone of Toronto's defensive core, now being questioned as to whether he belongs in a top four role. That's not just a slump, that's a full-blown identity crisis for both player and organization. David Staples of the Edmonton Journal captured the severity perfectly. His defensive play must be seen as awful this year for MacLean to be so bullish on the need for change for him. When your defensive game as a defenseman is being labeled awful, you've crossed a threshold from struggling to liability. For a team like Toronto, perpetually one defensive breakdown away from playoff heartbreak, that's an unacceptable position to be in. Here's where this gets fascinating from a pure hockey operations standpoint. Both Rielly and Nurse are anchored to their respective teams by no-movement clauses and contracts that run 4 more years. Rielly's deal carries that $7.5 million annual cap hit, with 2.5 years remaining on his no-movement protection. Nurse? He's locked in at a staggering $9.25 million per season with 1.5 years left on his no-movement clause. These aren't just contracts, they're financial commitments that can define whether a franchise contends or languishes in mediocrity. In the salary cap era, every dollar matters, and both Toronto and Edmonton are discovering that overpaying for underperforming defensemen is a recipe for organizational paralysis. MacLean acknowledged the elephant in the room regarding Nurse's contract. At $9.25 million, I mean that's a tough contract to swallow for a guy that is really inconsistent in his game. Inconsistency at that price point isn't just frustrating, it's franchise crippling. Yet MacLean still expressed willingness to take that gamble, which tells you everything about how far Rielly's stock has fallen in Toronto. The most intriguing aspect of this potential blockbuster isn't the hockey analytics or contract structures, it's the human element. Both players possess no-movement clauses, meaning this entire discussion is academic unless both men agree to waive. But here's the psychological pressure cooker both find themselves in. How long do you want to stay somewhere you're clearly not wanted? Staples noted that players have been known to waive such clauses if it makes sense for them. Translation: when the writing's on the wall, sometimes a fresh start beats fighting an uphill battle in a market that's turned against you. For Rielly, the Toronto media and fan base can be merciless. Every mistake is magnified, every defensive breakdown dissected endlessly on sports radio and social media. For Nurse, while things haven't reached that critical mass in Edmonton, the whispers are growing louder. His contract is frequently cited as one of general manager Stan Bowman's inherited albatrosses, a deal signed by previous management that handcuffs the team's flexibility. When your contract becomes a talking point for all the wrong reasons, that's when pride might take a backseat to pragmatism. From the Maple Leaf standpoint, this trade represents a fascinating gamble. Yes, they'd be taking on an additional $1.75 million in annual cap hit, but they'd be acquiring a player with a completely different skill set. Nurse brings physicality, size, and a defensive presence that Rielly simply doesn't possess. In playoff hockey, where games are won in the trenches and physical play intensifies exponentially, those attributes become exponentially more valuable. MacLean's willingness to take a chance on Nurse despite the contract concerns speaks volumes about Toronto's desperation to find a defensive identity. The Maple Leafs have been criticized for years, decades, really, for being too soft, too skilled, too perimeter-oriented. Nurse, for all his inconsistencies, brings an edge that Toronto desperately needs. Moreover, getting out from under Rielly's contract while his value hasn't completely cratered might be smart asset management. If his defensive play continues to deteriorate, that $7.5 million becomes an immovable anchor. Trading him now, even for a more expensive but differently skilled player, could be the kind of bold move that defines successful general managers. The question Toronto must answer: can Nurse thrive in the pressure cooker of the Toronto market? MacLean himself wondered about this, acknowledging, "We know the market, how tough it is." If Nurse struggles with consistency in Edmonton's hockey-mad but slightly less intense environment, how will he handle Toronto, where every shift is analyzed, every mistake immortalized? For the Oilers, this trade presents a completely different set of considerations, and they're not all hockey-related. Darnell Nurse isn't just another player on Edmonton's roster. He's reportedly extremely close friends with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, the two superstars who define this franchise's championship window. Trading Nurse isn't just a hockey decision. It's a political one that could ripple through the locker room in unpredictable ways. How do McDavid and Draisaitl react to seeing their close friend shipped out? Does it create resentment toward management? Does it send a message that loyalty means nothing when contracts become inconvenient? Staples raised this critical point, noting that any trade involving Nurse risks frustrating the leadership group of this team. In a league where player empowerment is increasingly important and superstar happiness can determine organizational success or failure, that's not a trivial concern. From a pure hockey standpoint, the Oilers' hesitation makes sense. Rielly would provide offensive upside from the blue line, something Edmonton desperately needs beyond their top pairing. His $7.5 million cap hit would free up nearly $2 million annually, money that could be deployed elsewhere to address roster needs. But here's the crushing reality. Rielly's defensive deficiencies are exactly what Edmonton doesn't need more of. The Oilers already struggle defensively. Their goaltending has been inconsistent, and their team defense has been a recurring issue for years. Adding another black hole on the defensive side, as one analysis suggested, could be catastrophic for a team with championship aspirations. If Stan Bowman pulls the trigger on moving Nurse, he needs to get back a defense-first, shut-down defenseman, not an offensive-minded player whose defensive game has fallen off a cliff. The risk-reward calculation simply doesn't add up for Edmonton unless they believe a change of scenery completely revitalizes Rielly's defensive commitment and effectiveness. One underexplored angle in this potential swap is how each player might respond to their new environment. Rielly has spent his entire career in Toronto, enduring the constant scrutiny, the playoff disappointments, and the weight of expectations that comes with wearing the maple leaf. Perhaps Edmonton's slightly less intense media environment, though still passionate, could allow him to play with more freedom and confidence. Conversely, Nurse moving to Toronto could go one of two ways. Either the increased pressure exposes his inconsistencies even more dramatically, or it galvanizes him to elevate his game to meet the moment. Some players thrive under pressure, others crumble. Which version of Darnell Nurse would show up at Scotiabank Arena? MacLean's uncertainty about how Nurse would handle Toronto is telling. It's the great unknown variable in this equation, and it's why general managers lose sleep over these kinds of franchise-altering decisions. This proposed trade speaks to a larger issue plaguing NHL front offices, the long-term contract problem. Both Rielly and Nurse signed extensions that seemed reasonable at the time, but have aged poorly as their play has declined or stagnated. In a hard-cap league, these contracts become organizational straitjackets, limiting flexibility and forcing difficult decisions. The fact that serious hockey minds are discussing this swap, despite the contracts, despite the no-movement clauses, despite the complications, demonstrates how desperate both organizations might be for change. Sometimes the best trades are the ones where both teams are trying to solve different problems, hoping the other team's problem is more manageable than their own. So, would this trade happen? Should it happen? The honest answer is, it depends on what you value and how much risk you're willing to accept. For Toronto, acquiring Nurse represents a bet that physicality and defensive presence matter more than offensive production from the blue line, and that the extra $1.75 million annually is worth it for a different skill set. It's also a bet that Nurse's inconsistency is more correctable than Rielly's defensive deficiencies. For Edmonton, trading Nurse for Rielly is a bet that offensive upside from the back end is more valuable than physicality, that Rielly's defensive struggles are environment-related rather than skill-related, and that the locker room fallout from trading McDavid's close friend won't derail the team's chemistry. Both bets carry significant risk. Both could backfire spectacularly. But that's what makes this proposed trade so compelling. It's not a clear win for either side, which paradoxically might make it fair enough to actually happen. The reality is that both players have reached inflection points in their careers where change might benefit everyone involved. Pride and no-movement clauses aside, sometimes the best thing for a struggling player is a fresh start, a new system, and an opportunity to redefine their narrative. Whether Stan Bowman and Brad Treliving have the courage to pull the trigger on such a bold, risky move remains to be seen. But one thing's certain. The conversation itself reveals how far both Rielly and Nurse have fallen from their once untouchable status. What do you think? Would this blockbuster trade solve problems for both teams or create even bigger headaches? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this analysis compelling, smash that like button. The hockey world is watching, and this story is far from over.